In the ancient kingdom of Kaelander, nestled between snow-capped mountains and silver rivers, there lived a warrior named Kaelan, known as the Iron Flame. He had risen from humble beginnings, a blacksmith's orphan son, to become the youngest commander in the kingdom's history. With hair like raven feathers and eyes the color of storm-washed steel, Kaelan was both admired and feared. But beneath the polished armor and the sword that never missed its mark, Kaelan held a secret he never voiced aloud, a longing for something more than battle. The object of that longing was Princess Aelires. She was the only child of King Alaric IV, and unlike the regal expectations thrust upon her, she often escaped the confines of the palace to walk among her people. She wore her curiosity like a crown and her compassion like a shield. With hair like spun gold and a voice that calmed even the wildest winds, Aelires was beloved by all. They first met not in a ballroom, but on the battlefield. It was during the siege of Halamer, when the southern reaches rebelled against the crown. Aelires had insisted on traveling with the medics, tending to the wounded. Kaelan found her kneeling beside a dying soldier, her dress stained with blood, her hands trembling as she tried to stop the bleeding. He had scolded her at first, not because she was royalty, but because war, he believed, was no place for such purity. But Aelires had looked up and said, "A crown means nothing if it does not bleed with its people." From that moment on, Kaelan was lost. After the war, Kaelan was summoned more frequently to the royal court, first as a celebrated war hero, then as captain of the royal guard. Each encounter with Aelires became a dance of hidden glances and unspoken feelings. He taught her to wield a dagger, she taught him to read poetry. In gardens and candlelit corridors, their bond deepened, though both knew it was forbidden. For Kaelan was of common blood, and Aelires was promised to Prince Saric of Athalia, a union meant to unite kingdoms and prevent another war. Their love grew in silence and shadows, and eventually, it could no longer be caged. One evening, under a blood moon, Kaelan met Aelires in the royal stables. She had tears in her eyes and a letter in her hand, her father's final order. She was to sail to Athalia in 3 days, to be married and crowned. "I would give up the throne," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I would give up everything." But Kaelan shook his head. "You are the soul of this realm, Aelires. If you break, the kingdom breaks with you." That night they shared a kiss, desperate, fierce, and filled with all the things they could never say again. It was both a promise and a farewell. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. A week before the wedding, Kaelander was invaded by an army of mercenaries led by the exiled Duke Viral, who sought the throne for himself. The royal army was shattered in the first onslaught. In the chaos, Kaelan led a desperate defense of the capital. As the palace burned, he found Aelires again, sword in hand, golden hair matted with soot. Together they fought side by side, just as they had in Halamer. But the enemy was too strong. Cornered in the throne room, Kaelan made a choice. He turned to her and said, "Live, Aelires. Live for both of us." Before she could stop him, Kaelan charged into the enemy's ranks, a storm of steel and fire. He cut down 10-20 men, an unstoppable force. His sacrifice gave the Queen's Guard time to spirit Aelires away through the hidden tunnels beneath the palace. When the smoke cleared, Kaelan was gone. Days later, Aelires returned with reinforcements from Athalia. The enemy was defeated, the capital reclaimed, but Kaelan's body was never found. They say Aelires stood in the ruins of the throne room for hours, waiting for a miracle. She took the crown that had once felt so heavy and placed it on her head, but her heart had been buried with the man she loved. Years passed. Queen Aelires ruled with unmatched wisdom and strength. Her name became legend. But in the royal garden, where roses bloomed even in winter, there was always a single white flower placed at the base of the statue of a lone warrior, Kaelan, the Iron Flame. Some say he still lives, walking the edges of the world, guarding Kaelander from the shadows. Others say he died that night, but his spirit watches over the queen he loved more than life itself. But Aelires believed something different. In her final days, she wrote in her journal. I loved a man of fire and honor, and though I wear a crown of gold, my heart belongs to the sword he left behind. Someday, when the stars are right, we shall meet again, not as queen and guard, but as souls unchained. Caelendar had become a land of peace, its borders secure, its people thriving. Queen Aelires, now in the twilight of her reign, was beloved more than ever. Her hair had turned to silver, but her eyes still burned with the same fire that once knelt beside wounded soldiers and defied kings for love. But peace has a price, and time never truly heals every wound. Aelires often wandered the royal gardens alone, past the rosebushes Caelin had once tended with her, past the statue of the warrior who had vanished in fire and steel. No body had ever been recovered, no grave ever found. She had mourned him, honored him, but never stopped believing he was out there, somewhere. And then, on the longest night of the year, something changed. That evening, a storm broke over Caelendar, fierce and unnatural. Lightning split the sky with eerie precision, always striking just beyond the city's borders. Whispers of shadows in the forest reached the queen's ears, of strange figures cloaked in ash-gray armor, moving like ghosts, speaking no language known to man. Aelires summoned the captain of her guard, her nephew Turin, and prepared for war once again. But even as Caelendar readied its armies, a lone rider arrived at the gates. He wore a cloak of black wool and bore a jagged scar across his cheek. His eyes were hidden beneath a weather-worn hood. The guards moved to strike him down when he pulled a blade from beneath his cloak, one Caelendar had not seen in 2 decades. It was the Sword of the Flame, Caelin's sword. The man collapsed at the gates, weak and fevered. When they brought him before the queen, Aelires descended the throne with slow, uncertain steps. Her people watched as she knelt beside him, her hands trembling not from fear, but recognition. He looked older, worn, haunted, but when their eyes met, everything around them faded. Caelin, she whispered. His voice was cracked and rough. I tried to come back sooner. He had not died that night in the palace. Caelin had been taken prisoner by a secret order known as the Veilborn, an ancient cult that sought to use his blood to awaken a slumbering darkness beneath the mountains of Draemar. For 20 years, they had kept him chained in shadow, forcing him to fight, to survive, to forget who he was. But Caelin had held on, clinging to a single memory: golden hair caught in moonlight, a whispered promise in a burning hall. Aelires. With the help of an old enemy-turned-friend, he had escaped. And now he had returned, not just as a man, but as a warning. The Veilborn had awakened the Hollow King, a being of void and flame, long thought vanquished in myth. He sought not just Caelendar, but Aelires herself, for her bloodline bore the last key to the gates of the underworld. There was no time to waste. Despite her council's protests, Aelires took up her sword once again. She and Caelin, both older and battle-scarred, rode together, just as they had in the wars of their youth. Turin, the young captain, joined them, along with warriors from Athalia and the mountain tribes of the east. Their journey led them to the ruined city of Draemar, now twisted by shadow and crawling with horrors born of nightmare. There, in the final battle, Caelin stood at the gates of the underworld, holding the Hollow King at bay while Aelires descended into the ancient temple to seal the breach with her blood. She completed the ritual, but it came at a cost. The power of the seal drained her life, collapsing the temple around her. Caelin, sensing her fading life, stormed through fire and ruin to reach her. He found her collapsed beneath the old altar, eyes open, smile soft. "You came back," she whispered. "I never left," he said, taking her into his arms. But this time, the gods were listening. As her breath began to slow, a voice echoed through the temple, not cruel, not kind, but ancient. The gods offered them a choice. One soul must remain behind to guard the seal for eternity, but the other could live, reborn in peace. Caelin didn't hesitate. Aelires cried out, begging him not to, but he silenced her with a kiss. "I died once for the crown," he said. "Let me live again by protecting you." The temple exploded in light. Aelires awoke days later in the arms of her guards, the war won, the Hollow King banished. Calin was gone again. But this time, she felt no despair. She ruled for 5 more years, not as a queen burdened by grief, but as a woman who had loved, lost, and loved again. When she died, her tomb was placed beside Caelin's statue, and a white rose was carved between them, entwined with a sword of fire. Legends say Caelin still guards the gate below Draymar, standing watch with his blade, waiting for the day they will be reunited. And when the wind howls just right across the mountains, travelers claim they hear a voice whisper, "I kept my promise,